Today, we're going to show you how to remove and install the Bafang Ultra motor. For this job, you are going to need a few tools, including a dead blow hammer, a ratchet wrench, a 13mm socket with extension, a 15mm wrench, an ISIS drive crank puller, a 5mm and 8mm hex key, a Phillips head screwdriver, and a spare hex key of any size. Before working with the motor, the first step is always to remove the battery from the bike. To start, use the 5mm hex key to remove the chainring and chain guards. This will allow for easy access to the motor bolts. There are 5 bolts, spacers, and nuts. Be careful not to lose these. Once the bolts are removed, you can slide the chainring and guards over the crank arm and pedal. Next, you can remove the crank arms with the ISIS drive crank puller and 8mm hex key. This step is optional, depending on why you're removing the motor. While being careful not to cross-thread it, tighten the crank puller into the crank arm. Now, use the 15mm wrench to tighten the extractor on the crank puller until the crank arm is removed. Next, take off the plastic motor cover with the Phillips head screwdriver. Sometimes, this can be a Torx or hex bolt, so check what your bike has before starting the job. Finally, using the ratchet wrench and 13mm socket, loosen the 3 nuts holding the motor in the frame. These can be very tight, so you may want to use a breaker bar. With the nuts removed, the motor bolts can be tapped out of the frame with the dead blow hammer and spare hex key or similar tool. If you have your bike in a stand, place something under the motor to support it when the bolts are removed. We like to use an adjustable height stool. With the motor free from the frame, the connections can be unplugged. While tightly squeezing the sides of the connectors, pull out and down to free the tongue that is securing the connector. Be sure to pull in the connector itself, not the wires. Now, the motor is uninstalled. The motor is easiest to reinstall with the bike inverted. You can do this in a bike stand or on the ground with blocks under the handlebars to protect the bike's display. Plug in the power connector and main wiring harness, then place the motor in the frame. Pull the other plugs to the side of the motor casing so that the motor lays flat and the holes line up. This is a great time to plug in the connections and power up the bike to test the motor. With the motor tested, the bolts can be reinstalled. Apply grease to the bolts to make them easy to slide into the frame. If the holes are lined up properly, the bolts should easily slide through the frame. However, you may need to tap them lightly with the dead blow hammer. Now, tighten the nuts onto the motor bolts. You may need to use a hex key on the head of the bolt to make sure it doesn't spin while tightening. Tuck the wires and plugs into the motor casing and reinstall the plastic cover. Next, reinstall the chainring and chain guards. The order for installation is the inner guard, chainring spider, chainring, spacers, then the outer guard. Tighten the chainring bolts in a star pattern. If you have a torque wrench, you can torque them to 5 to 10 Newton meters. Lastly, install the crank arms with the 8mm hex key. Make sure these bolts are very tight, or 45 Newton meters with a torque wrench. Now power up the bike and give it a test. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please leave a comment or email us at support@biktrix.com. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos.